Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Meet the Parents podcast. Once again, we're back with our weekly half hour of parenting chat from some of your favourite bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and this week I'm here with Hannah from Budding Smiles and Vicky from Verily Victoria Vocalisers. Good evening, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
So, on the podcast this week, we're going to chat about how our expectations of parenthood compare to the reality. Hannah wrote a great post last week entitled "I'm Not the Mum I Thought I Would Be," which, for those of you who grew up in the 80s, sounds rather like the title of a Fine Young Cannibals song, doesn't it? Anyhow, it got me thinking about how the reality of parenthood is rarely what we expect. Sometimes in good ways, and sometimes not so good. So, Hannah, why don't you start by telling us a bit about what you thought becoming a mum would be like before Toby was born?
I think, in a nutshell, Toby pretty much took any expectations I had and bulldozed them. I never thought that parenthood would be easy. I grew up with a mum as a childminder, and I've worked in nurseries and education settings, so I kind of understood that parenthood wasn't easy without having obviously experienced it for myself. But I had these sort of ideals that I would be baking and I'd be a real earth mother, very gentle sort of mother, and a stay-at-home mum life would be exactly what I wanted. And then Toby came along, and bless him, it was not his fault, but he had terrible silent reflux, which was down to a dairy allergy, which we didn't know about for a long time. And he screamed for 10 hours a day. And all of a sudden, being a stay-at-home mum was the most suffocating experience. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And as he's gotten older, he can be a very challenging little boy. He's incredibly intelligent and incredibly emotional with it. And I find myself not quite being the gentle earth mother that I had hoped to be, and I most certainly don't do baking very often because it is far more stress than it's worth when I could just pop down to the bakery and buy some brownies. Martha, it fits more the thoughts that I'd had about parenthood, but obviously I have Toby as well, so the whole thing has just been completely different to what I thought it would be.
What else would you say was particularly tough or surprising about becoming a mum?
From an emotional level, I really thought I was quite emotionally strong in a lot of ways. I'd done a lot of one of my main jobs that I had prior to getting married and having the kids was I worked in special education needs, and I worked in a residential college, so it's sort of 16 plus year olds with very aggressive behaviour, and I could deal with that so level-headedly. I could deal with any situation that came, including being punched and kicked and spat at and bitten and all sorts. So I just kind of thought, I'm going to be able to deal with toddlers, no problem. And again, the emotional attachment, because it's your child and not somebody else's. It doesn't mean I didn't care about my students, but I didn't have that deep emotional attachment and that love that can then lead to it. You just find it so much harder when it comes to the more negative aspects of parenting. So I really found that my emotions fluctuated so much more drastically than I thought they would.
It's emotionally draining, but it's also physically draining as well, isn't it? And that really takes it out of you, doesn't it? I mean, it's harder to cope emotionally when you're physically tired all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, again, back in that previous job, I used to work 70-hour weeks. I did a mixture of nights and days and everything in between. And I'd roll from one shift to the next on overtime just to try and pay my mortgage. So I thought, I'm used to being tired and still functioning. But there is such a difference between the normal tiredness of working a lot and doing crazy shift patterns and the extreme sleep deprivation that comes from having a baby that wakes up every half an hour or so.
Was there anything about those early months with Toby that you found easier than you were expecting?
I found breastfeeding probably in a lot of ways easier than I'd been expecting. Although it didn't quite work out, that was more because of his undiagnosed dairy problems. If that had been diagnosed earlier, I would have been able to cut dairy out of my own diet and carry on breastfeeding for longer. So I think that actually worked out better than I possibly thought it would do. I never really thought that I would breastfeed, to be honest. I was bottle fed, my brother was bottle fed. I didn't really know that many people who had breastfed, and so that was something that came a lot more naturally to me in the end than I had thought it would previously, which was quite nice.
Vicky, were things similar with Grace with regards to feeding?
I have to say, I did find breastfeeding very painful, but I battled through it somehow. And it was her, actually, who decided to stop at 9 months. So I would have carried on because I got used to it by that point.
And your experience sounds quite similar to my wife's. I mean, she breastfed to about 9 months as well. And I don't think she set out with any... I think she wanted to do it, to try to do it naturally to start with, but I don't think she set out with any real expectations of feeding for as long as she did. And she found it quite difficult to stop as well. And this was despite having had a lot of problems in those early weeks with getting a good latch. And I remember Isaac was born about 3 weeks before Christmas, and on Christmas Day she developed quite a bad bout of mastitis, which involved a trip to the local hospital, which wasn't exactly how she'd been planning to spend Christmas afternoon. And yet, she...
Poor thing.
And yet that bond did develop, and as I said, she breastfed for 9 months, and it was a real tear when she gave up. And Hannah, how about Phil? Did he have any particular expectations of fatherhood?
I'm not sure, really. I think because everything happened very quickly. We got married in September of 2013 and fell pregnant in October, so we didn't really get a chance to be newlyweds as such, and we threw ourselves straight into expecting the baby. I think he was sort of similar. We'd always spoken about the fact that he was going to go out and earn the money and I was going to be the stay-at-home mum, and so I think, again, my reaction to everything possibly took him by surprise, and neither of us had been expecting, as we all say, we weren't expecting a Toby, and so I think he had the same sort of shock to the system that I had, the emotional thing and the sleep deprivation that just hit him a lot harder as well, the same as it did myself.
Was there anything in particular that he found harder or maybe easier than he was expecting?
I think he found it harder when he felt useless with things. We both quite often felt very useless with Toby, and we couldn't stop him from being in pain before we figured out what the problem was. So I think from that respect, Phil didn't like not being able to fix things, being able to help how I was feeling. But then the flip side of that was that Toby did combination feed. He would have a bottle of expressed milk from only about 2 weeks old. He was absolutely fine with that. So Phil had the benefit that he could actually help me out by taking Toby out and about and giving me a bit of breathing space to recuperate a little bit. So that was good for him. He got that opportunity, which this time around with Martha, she's flat out refused a bottle. She's 9 months old. So Phil has never, ever been able to give her a single feed and never spent more than about 2 hours with her without me being present. So that respect, Toby was much easier for Phil than Martha has been as far as actually spending that time together.
Funny what you say. Some of what Phil went through certainly resonates with some of my experiences. I'm not sure I had any real fixed expectations about what I thought impending fatherhood would be like. This is despite the fact that Heather and I had been together, almost 16 years to the day when Isaac was born, and married for 10 of those years. So I'd had plenty of time to think about it. I guess maybe it's a bit different for dads as opposed to mums in terms of that particular equation. You know the old line about the difference between involvement and commitment. It's like bacon and eggs. The hen's involved, but the pig's committed. I guess, the one thing I can definitely remember is the sense of not feeling in any way ready for impending fatherhood. I mean, we'd done NCT classes together and I'd read the books and, all that other stuff that you do. But as much as I wanted kids, I think deep down, I always struggled to picture myself as a natural father. And I think perhaps I was a bit shocked by how much a little baby consumed almost 100% attention from two parents. Although Heather breastfed for about 9 months with Isaac, she expressed as well. So I feel like I got to do some feeds as well. I can certainly remember spending vast amounts of time washing and drying reusable nappies, and Isaac was a bit like Toby. He was a terrible sleeper. I used to spend ages wandering around the house trying to soothe him to sleep, and in the end I discovered that he found the warmth of our utility room and the white noise of the tumble dryer was his favourite spots. But
at least it wasn't a car.
And that was the thing, though. I mean, he never used to go down for naps in his cot, so him and I used to spend a lot of time in that first 18 months or so. I've lost count of the number of hours I must have spent blogging on my phone, parked on our driveway with the sleeping infant in the back.
Phil spent an awful lot of time on he had a month's paternity leave when Toby was born, and he spent pretty much every evening of that month and then the weeks and months following it driving all the way around Rutland at between about 4 and 5 o'clock, because he would get home from work and I would just be in pieces about the fact that he'd not slept and he was screaming, and that was the thing that Phil would come in and pretty much take Toby, pop him in the car and just drive around. That was my little bit of a break.
Vicky, let's turn to you now. Now, actually the same day Hannah wrote the post that we were just talking about, you wrote a post titled Pregnancy Now Compared to 10 Years Ago. So comparing being pregnant with Grace to your current pregnancy. So thinking back 10 years to when you were pregnant with Grace, what were your expectations of motherhood?
I had put off being mum for quite a long time for various reasons, and also discovered that I'd had this balanced translocation in my chromosome, so there was a risk factor involved and things like that. I think at that time my expectations were fairly realistic, and that's thanks to my mum, really. I'm the eldest of 7 kids, so I was changing nappies at the age of 8 and 9 and looking after and babysitting quite early on. And I think as a result of that, I think I knew that motherhood wasn't a walk in the park, and I was lucky. But also, I mean, I think also at the same time I had a few expectations which weren't realistic, in the fact that I thought Grace would be really straightforward and, and things like that. Also now, I mean, I'm worrying about different things to the ones I worried about 10 years ago. Things like, obviously, because we've been through so much to get where we are, I'm constantly worrying that things might go wrong. Whereas when I was pregnant with Grace, that didn't really cross my mind. I just naturally assumed she would be fine and I would give birth to a healthy baby, which I, of course, did. Now, because of what we've been through, I keep thinking, oh, God, every niggle, every little feeling, because I can't remember it from last time round. I think, oh, no, is that something, shouldn't be happening? And I think also the tiredness is a lot more prominent compared to last time as well. So I find myself, getting tired easier and more out of breath, and, find walking around can be quite hard work.
It's interesting, actually, because our experience was almost the other way round. I think we were much more anxious and worried first time round because it had taken us 5 or 6 years of trying before Isaac was born, and we'd been through and had the series of miscarriages and so on. So I guess kind of naturally we were quite anxious about what could go wrong, having experienced that before, whereas second and third time round I think we were much more relaxed, and and maybe some of the issues that Isaac had in terms of being a little bit difficult sleeping and so on were a reflection of our anxiety even after he was born.
Yeah.
Once Grace had been born, was there anything that was particularly hard or easy that surprised you?
What I found hard was learning a new person, and I trying to guesstimate what was wrong with them. If they were crying, trying to learn their cries, trying to learn if they were hungry or if they were hurting or if they were tired. And that took me a while. And I think, because I wasn't in a solid situation, I think that upset Grace more. Although I did find, and I never expected to be a single parent, and I found that really hard because obviously by that point, she was just relying on me. I mean, I was lucky enough to live with my mum for the first 18 months or so of her life. And my mum was brilliant. Having been the mum of 7 kids already, she was always helping me and giving me advice. So, I was very lucky there. But when I came to actually live on my own with Grace, that was a different kettle of fish. And I found that it could be really lonely. So it was hard work. And that took me aback a bit because I didn't ever think I'd be in that position. But now I'm glad I was, because I think as a result of that, growing up, she didn't have any of the issues. She didn't have to experience any of the problems. And she grew up in a calm environment as a result, albeit me being a bit of a headless chicken at times. But I think as a result of that, she grew up in a much more stable situation than she could have done. And I have to say, one thing that I was really lucky with was how quickly she potty trained. That took me back a bit as well, how quickly she was happy to just go and sit on a toilet or a potty. I was like, oh, yes, thank you.
See, I'm dreading that, so I'm going to cling on to that last sentence of yours. Well, Toby.
This might be too much information, so apologies now, but I'm going to talk poo here. What I did find is that when she was going to the toilet, I'd explain to her what was happening. So she actually started getting in her head. She understood that what she was doing was going to the toilet. So when she started doing that, I helped her, and she then realised that would be when she needed to go to the toilet. So actually, it was easier to train her with the number 2s than it was with the number 1s, I have to say that. There were a couple of moments in shopping centres where we had to go and buy new pants. But with regards to the number 2, she was really quick off the mark with that, and it was brilliant. So, I taught her that first. That was good.
They often say, don't they, that girls are easier to potty train or toilet train than boys are. And that's certainly been our experience. I think with Isaac, he was about 2.5, and he took a little bit of cajoling, but he got it reasonably quickly. Toby had to be pretty much forced into being toilet trained, because we decided, right, this is it, you're doing it now. Whereas Cara I don't think she was even 2 yet when she decided that, no, you know what, I'm going to sit on the toilet now.
Yeah, Grace was the same.
Yeah, she pretty much toilet trained herself, which was quite nice.
It was brilliant, and I actually have to say, I wonder now. Obviously, we don't know at the moment what the gender is, so I wonder how it's going to pan out if we have a boy.
Well, Toby's he's just coming up 2 years and 7 months, and when he's actually doing a poo at the moment, he'll look at me and go, "Mummy, don't change me." So he gets very defensive about the whole situation.
Moving off the subject of toilet training for a sec, I guess thinking back to my early experiences, I think what surprised me the most was how quickly I settled into being a father. Having said how unconfident and unsure I was beforehand. I mean, for someone who could never picture himself as a dad, I guess I just kind of got on with it, and I surprised myself with how much I enjoyed it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't all easy by any means, but I don't think for 1 minute I would have been cut out to be a stay-at-home dad, but somehow I did adjust to having my world turned upside down and suddenly having all my free time taken up by nappy changes and feeding and just having a baby snuggled up to me on the sofa. And actually one of my favourite photos from those early months was one of me sat on the sofa with Isaac, and he must have been 3 weeks old, I guess, at the time. And he was just splayed out on my chest, all kind of tiny and comfortable, and he bonded with me really quickly in a way that Toby didn't. And I think that went a long way to overcoming some of my fears of becoming a father early on. So, Vicky, in your post, you talked about some of the differences between 10 years ago and now. And, we've talked about the emotional journey that you've been on over the past few years before, but you highlighted a number of other things as well, like how your work is different now to how it was then, and how your symptoms are different, and so on. So talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, last time when I was pregnant with Grace, I was a driving instructor, so I was always out on the road in a car with poor nervous students next to me. And of course, as soon as they see I'm pregnant as well, the poor things didn't know what to do with themselves. But, I was always very calm as an instructor. And they said to me, if we need to go to the hospital, I can drive you there. No, it'll be fine. Don't worry. Generally speaking, I have to say it was a lot more. I had stuff to do all of the time. I was always out on the road. And my symptoms, luckily, I didn't get morning sickness. It was just really bad heartburn and wind, and I was on Gaviscon all the time. And there was only one time where I thought I was actually going to be sick, when I was driving with a student, and luckily he was quite experienced and he didn't realise, and we were on a long stretch of road, so I opened my window and thankfully it passed. I didn't have to do too much instructing at that point. So yeah, it was very different the last time round, and I was running my own business. This time, of course, I work from home, so I can go and have a lie down if I want to, whenever I want to. I can call my own shots on my hours. So if I'm feeling a bit rubbish at one point, I can sort of put it off and do it a bit later. But I do find I tend to get a little bit less exercise as a result. So I'm trying to make sure I go out for walks on a regular basis, so I don't sit around and then get used to the fact that I'm not doing any exercise. So yeah, that's one of the things that different. I mean, the other thing with my symptoms this time around is I'm getting headaches quite regularly, and my poor sinuses feel like they're going to explode. So poor Ross, I think, is going to need to get earplugs at some point because I'm snoring all the time. But it seems to be we're shifting in our sleep patterns because he comes to bed quite late now and goes to sleep when I'm waking up in the middle of the night. So we're starting to say we're getting into a shift ready for the baby when it comes. So it's sort of working. Also, the other thing I'm concerned about this time is my labour, because the last time around, even though it was a long process with Grace, I was very lucky because everything went according to plan. I had a water birth with gas and air, whereas this time I don't know what my stamina is going to be like. So I want to go back and do pregnancy yoga again because I did it last time, and I did aquanator classes last time.
One of the other things you also touched on was how the internet and social media has changed your experience of pregnancy. So tell us a bit about your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, it's completely different. I mean, when I was pregnant with Grace, Facebook, didn't even know what that was. Didn't really know what Twitter was. I had a computer, but I didn't use it very regularly because, of course, I was out on the road all the time. I didn't really get emails. Everything was done by text and phone. So social media was practically non-existent. And this time around, it's completely the opposite. You go on Facebook, you announce your pregnancy. Everyone wants to see your pictures and your bump, and you can. But it's brilliant because now I've got a documented diary of the whole process, and that's something I never had with Grace. I can write it down on my blog, everything that's happened, and then one day I can refer back to it. And when Little asks me what happened then or what happened then, I can show them. And I think one of the most important things in all of this, because we had egg donation, I really would like the baby to understand just how much it was wanted. And this is why we did this. And hopefully with all the documentation and history that we've got from this, we can show it.
And Hannah, with both your children, you've been pregnant and been through the baby and toddler phase with Toby, accompanied by the explosion in parenting forums and blogs and social media. And I mean, what impact has that had on you, and in what ways has it benefited you?
I think it's actually been hugely beneficial. I know you see a lot of discussions about whether it's good to be sharing everything on the internet and all this comparisons and being judgmental and all the rest of it. But actually, for me, especially with Toby, it was so valuable, because when I was up at 2:00 in the morning and he hadn't stopped screaming all day and all night, I was able to chat to people on Twitter or Facebook, and actually it was fellow bloggers who, I was still such a new blogger at that point, but it was other people, Suzanne from Ghostwriter Mummy in particular, who were saying to me, I recognise what you're saying, have you thought about silent reflux? And so it was actually other bloggers and people online who helped me to find a diagnosis for Toby, where the healthcare professionals were just not helping particularly. So actually, I think that although we didn't have the most blissful time when he was a baby, I do think that being present on social media and on the internet and through the blog and everything did play a really positive role. And as Vicky said, it's having it all recorded and documented, both of my pregnancies and births, and all of our experiences since the kids have been born are all there on my blog. And even long after I stopped writing Budding Smiles, I plan to have not the reviews and such, but the actual aspects of the journals of our lives. I'm going to have that collated into a book, because I just think it's such an amazing thing to keep and to pass down. I think it's really lovely. So I'm really pleased to have experienced pregnancy and parenthood in this age.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to hear. And I guess from my perspective, as one of what is still a relatively small number of dad bloggers, it's interesting that I've been able to tap into that same community and and been welcomed in with open arms by fellow bloggers, whether male or female. Now, I think the nature of that relationship is probably a bit different for dads than it is for mums. We probably don't need that kind of support group around us in quite the same way that it's been so obviously beneficial for you. But, at the same time, it's given me a real window into such a diverse range of parenting experiences. And, alongside getting to meet local fellow parents, social media and blogs have been my primary source of new friendships over the last 9 or 10 years. So, it's brought me into contact with, with people such as the two of you. Anyhow, Hannah, you're a year or so ahead of Vicky in terms of the road to becoming a mum for the second time. So, with Martha, you did have the benefit of your first experience with Toby, but second time around proved to be quite different and in some ways more difficult as well. So, talk us through that.
My pregnancy with Martha was harder than Toby's. It was by no means a bad pregnancy. It certainly could have been an awful lot worse, but the sickness was a lot worse. And then actually, Vicky, when you mentioned headaches, that was something I nodded along to, because I then went from having a lot of sickness, and then that eased up, and I had a couple of blissful weeks before the headaches and the migraines started, and then those eased off after a month or so, and I had really bad pelvic girdle pain, PGP, where some days I was walking on crutches because my hips and my pelvis and my lower back were just absolute agony. So from that perspective, it was a lot harder. Martha's birth, her labour was harder than Toby's, although it didn't last quite as long. With Toby, I was labouring, we were 26 hours basically from labour to delivery. With Martha, I think it was pretty much bang on 24 hours, I think. It was a harder labour, but a fantastic delivery. So I count myself as having been really, really lucky with both births, actually. So I think because I knew that I'd done it before with Toby and only 21 months previously as well, I felt that I could trust my body, because I thought, you've trusted yourself before and you did it, trust yourself again. And so even when I was finding Martha's labour incredibly difficult, I basically just went into my own little world. I wasn't talking to anybody. I was completely isolated from Phil and the midwife, who were whispering around me so as not to disturb me, and I just got myself completely into the zone. I was like, you can do this, and I did, and it was a wonderful experience in the end. I had a fantastic delivery with both of them.
But then following Martha's birth, that wasn't the easiest time for you either, was it?
It wasn't. I think now that as I say, she's nearly 9 months now, that we're a lot further down the line, I can reflect a little bit on my postnatal depression diagnosis, and I actually think that Martha has always been a much more settled baby, and she fitted the expectation that I'd had of parenthood a lot more than Toby did. And I actually think that part of the cause of my postnatal depression was having a more settled baby and realising it just sort of hit me just how hard it had been with Toby. We knew we were having quite a rough time, but then having Martha really highlighted just how difficult it had been. And so I think all of those emotions and all of everything that I just kept up inside of me to just get through every single day with Toby, then all came flooding out, and it came out in the form of postnatal depression. So that was difficult, and it wasn't Martha per se, it was just reliving everything. And I think because I had them so close together, actually everything with Toby was still very raw, and I hadn't realised just how raw it still was.
It's such a roller coaster of emotions, isn't it? So I guess it's understandable how that could manifest itself so easily. Now, you've used CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, to help you deal with it, haven't you? So tell us a bit more about what's involved with that.
So unlike sort of more traditional therapy with the whole, sitting on the sofa and talking about your past and all that sort of thing, cognitive behavioural therapy is more about looking at how you view yourself and how you view the world around you, and where there might be some imbalance, and basically sort of retraining your brain and your thought processes. So we did go back into my past about being bullied and things like that to look at why I had a very negative perception of myself. But we also looked at the fact that I felt like I didn't have a very good bond with Toby, that I wasn't a particularly good mother, and evaluated why I was thinking about these things. It was a case of, okay, well, why are you feeling that way? How can we retrain your brain so that you can develop a better bond with Toby, so that you can realise that you're not a terrible mother and things like that? And my therapist was fantastic in teaching me mindfulness techniques to help me not snap as quickly when Toby is maybe having a bit of a tantrum or is being particularly challenging, and just dealing with day-to-day things a lot better. So I think it might not be for everybody, but for me personally, it was so valuable, because since having my CBT, if I find myself sort of slipping into bad habits, I can take a moment and gather my thoughts and just think, okay, what do I need to do? I need to just focus my mind, and I just deal with things better.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like a really good technique just for generally dealing with life's hardships, not just for dealing with PND. So I guess just finally, just to wrap this up, any advice that you would offer Vicky in terms of, as she works her way through her second trimester and hurtles towards her third, any advice that you would give her?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's so different for everybody. I think personally, although I had a rough time, as I said, with the PGP and everything, I think blogging, as you're already doing, it just means that you are retaining all of that experience, and I think that is just such a special thing to have, and you sound like you're doing a good thing by resting when you can and taking breaks when you feel rough, because I think that's so good. And I think because you've got that slightly that bigger age gap, Vicky, you can. I still had Toby running around like an absolute madhead, because he was only sort of 1.5 when I was at the stage that you're at now with Martha's pregnancy. So yeah, take advantage of the rest and get out and have nice bits of fresh air when you can. I think that's wonderful. But I really think the big thing was I knew, we were pretty sure that Martha was going to be our last baby, and she definitely is. And so I think it is just about soaking it all up and recording it all, and just finding the good bits, even if you're having a bit of a rubbish day, because it's such an incredible time. It's such an amazing journey, isn't it? And I just love the fact that we've got that there recorded on our blogs to always look back on. I think it's fantastic.
That's a great piece of advice, actually. I have to say, the other thing I'm going to take from you is remembering what you felt during your labour, because one of the things you said was going into a zone, and that is exactly what I did when I was giving birth to Grace. I shut everybody else out. I was in a zone just on my own, and it was just me and her, and I was talking to her about trying, making sure that we could get through this together. So I'm just going to take that from last time and from what you've just said and remember it for the next time.
Yeah, honestly, because we all thought, the midwife included, everybody thought that Martha was going to be delivered by cesarean. And obviously, if she'd have needed to be, that was fine. And I was kind of prepared for that. But I think because I did just put myself in my zone, I shut everybody else out, that actually meant that I had the best possible chance of delivering her naturally. And it happened, all of a sudden. I can distinctly remember just sort of being there, and all of a sudden my waters went, and that was it. I was back in the room, and I sort of regained full control. I was back in the room, and the midwife had gone out, and I was like, Phil, press the button, we need the midwife, this baby's coming. And he's like, oh no, there was 3 hours between your waters breaking and Toby arriving. I was like, this is different, she's coming. But I was so in tune with what was going on, and just trust yourself, because however it ends up, whatever sort of delivery, if you trust yourself and you're in tune with your body, then it will be the best possible version of that delivery that you can have.
So that's our thoughts on both the expectations and the realities of being a parent. There's so often a big difference between the two, but then again, if life was that predictable, it wouldn't be very interesting, would it? And that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the three of us online. Hannah?
I am at Budding Smiles on all social media channels, and my blog is buddingsmiles.co.uk.
And Vicky?
You can find my blog, Verily Victoria Vocalizes, at vevivos.com, and I'm on social media at Vic Welton.
And I am at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Please follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast, and also Facebook at facebook.com/Meet the Parents Podcast. So thank you for listening, and please join us again for more parenting chat next week. Good night.